what it means to watch a movie is changing.
Major layoffs have begun at Pixar.
Massive cost-cutting measures.
This is part of a larger problem. The VFX should be getting better and better and better with all this tech coming out. The big secret is that movie executives don't really care about quality. All they care about is making sure that people go see it.
This is Zach Mulligan, a 3D animator with over a decade of experience in Hollywood working at studios such as DreamWorks Animation. He has worked on movies like The Bad Guys, Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom, Black Adam, and The Flash. Zach has captivated a huge audience online by breaking down animated films and addressing problems in the industry.
What do you think is the most significant cause that could be the downfall of the animation industry?
The obvious answer and the most uncomfortable one is probably just... If you talk about the future of where this industry is going, I think indie studios is kind of the future of this. When you start democratizing these tools and making it easier for artists to access the same tool sets, you're going to see a lot of really cool art come.
You have created amazing content. You break down all your ideas. You talk about the industry. Zach, what we want to start with is, how did you get into the animation industry?
Zach, welcome to the Bad Decisions podcast.
Hello, guys. Great to be here. Thank you.
I love it, man. It's a pleasure to have you. Me and Farhad have some burning questions. Farhad, I'll give the mic to you.
100%.
Technically, we have two mics, so we don't need to do it, but theoretically.
Zach, we've been watching your videos on YouTube. We have stumbled upon your clips on TikTok as well. You have created amazing content. We really love the way you break down all your ideas. You talk about the industry. The way you share information, I think, is one of the most outstanding pieces that we've ever seen.
Oh, thank you, guys. I appreciate that.
And Zach, what we want to start with is you worked at DreamWorks Animation Studio. Also, you worked on big titles such as The Flash, Black Adam, Aquaman. How did you get into the animation industry?
Yeah, so I went to film school, and I had an LA program out here in Los Angeles, and I got an internship at DreamWorks. And through my connections there, I was able to just kind of, learn about the animation industry as a whole. And, my specialty in school kind of became animation just through my own interests. And I kind of became like the VFX guy and then the animation guy. So it just kind of like, dovetailed into animation. But when I started at DreamWorks, I was an intern for like that first semester. And then moved back to graduate in New York, moved back to LA, worked at the Jim Henson Company for about a year and a half. And then after that, got a job at DreamWorks on their TV side in the post-production department. So I was there starting like from that stint in post-production for 4 years after that. So I was working in different TV shows as a post coordinator through the pandemic, and then starting remotely on The Bad Guys, which was the feature that I worked on at DreamWorks, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, I kind of, went to school to be a filmmaker, kind of like anybody, just wanting to go into something creative, and just kind of found myself like really falling in love with my animation roots, and just going through the pipeline like that. But yeah, so I ended up at DreamWorks just as the sort of on the coordinator side and the production side, and we could talk about the two of how the production side and the artist side are two different branches that I like to call it in animation, but both are equally important. So I was more on the production side, and I got to see how a lot of the the structure of the animation industry plays out, and interface with the artists directly that were working on these shots, and giving them their work, checking in with them, making sure that they had everything they need. And in addition, I am also an animator as well, so I kind of had that like background to be able to like talk with them and know exactly kind of what I was talking about. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into the industry. It was just powering forward, I guess.
I love that. What was the most favorite project of yours that you worked on?
Probably The Bad Guys, because that was my first introduction to feature film. Before that, it was all episodic TV. Worked on shows like Captain Underpants, Where's Waldo, some other Peacock and Netflix original series. But once I started working on The Bad Guys and I got to interface with a lot of the feature artists at that point, it was a completely different pipeline, a lot more fast-paced. TV, the nature of TV is that it's quick and fast-paced, but there's not a lot of money in it. With feature, they're throwing everything into the machine and trying to get that to work. So it was really cool to see that feature animation side. And, you know, we were completely remote during 2020 into 2021 for the entirety of this project. And it was a lot of fun to work with these artists for so long and then finally meet them in person in the last like couple months of development and, you know, realize that everyone's a lot taller than I am.
Wow. But, so you didn't see any of your team members when you started the project?
Correct. Yeah. I knew one person. It was someone that I worked with at Henson, and she was my supervisor. But other than that, I didn't meet anybody in person until like a year into working on the project, which was crazy. But
wow.
Yeah. So trying to do a whole movie remote was a whole experience. And I don't know if I recommend it, but it was a lot of fun.
How did you guys collaborate, basically? Because everybody was working from home and there was no physical meeting happening at that time.
Yeah, so we did everything over like Google Meets and, you know, Gmails and chats and everything. So it was a lot of, you know, just chatting artists and getting on a call with them maybe once or twice a week. But other than that, you know, you're just working by yourself and getting all your work done independently. And then, you know, getting on the giant meetings with everybody where you have the director and you have the producers and the animators themselves and, you know, sitting in these gigantic meetings, you know, on mute, camera off, but still being able to kind of see everybody. And so it was a really unique experience. And once we started going into the office and I realized like how it's supposed to work, I was like, oh, we're getting so much more done in person. This is crazy. So it was very unique. And it, you know, some of the artists I know had a really good experience with being completely at home. Like, you know, they were raising kids and they were able to like be home all the time and be able to work. So they were like, this is great. I never want to go back in the office. And others were like, I need to be in person because I need that like human connection. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but we ended up making it work. And I think the movie came out really well, but it's, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
You know, working on a feature film is a dream of many artists, like yourself as well. This is why it's your most favorite project. What is the one thing that you overlooked or one thing that surprised you when you joined in that you didn't expect at all?
Oh, that's a good question. I think just, you know, the amount that goes into the smallest details, I would say, of, you know, entire meetings can be had about the color of the jacket of a background extra. And, you know, it can be a whole discussion and it can be the thing of like, you know, the color designer comes in and production designer and says, well, this jacket has to be blue because in the tonality of the scene and what's going on, the character is feeling sad. So we need to emphasize the cooler colors and it can't be red because X, Y, Z. So, you know, entire discussions can happen about the smallest details. And that's the kind of thing you can do in feature animation is like really harp on those background details and, you know, just get really into the weeds. And that's kind of where the fun discussions happen of, especially with character animation specifically, where the performance of the characters, you know, sometimes the notes that they are giving is, you know, just raise the eyebrow just a little bit higher, or just, you know, squint the eyes just a little bit more because we need to X, Y, Z. Like it's the amount of small, tiny details that get discussed on these movies is astounding. But, so it, you know, if you're very detail oriented, you're going to do well in feature. I've always said that, but it's, yeah, that was probably the big thing that surprised me was just how much control that, you know, the artist had over the smallest details. And sometimes they'd be on screen for 3 frames and that was it. But we've had these like long, like hour-long discussions about what needs to go through. But yeah.
But everybody's on board with that, right? Everybody's down with, okay.
So even the team, they're okay to go back and make changes and...
As long as they're getting paid well. I think that's
exactly.
also,
overtime. If it's not the weekend.
Yeah. No, I think, you know, the nature of feature animation just in general is that everyone is super on board with making the best thing that they possibly can. And, you know, if it needs a few more rounds of retakes and notes, then they're going to, you know, do the best they can to make it as good as possible. And the sequence that we worked on for like the longest chunk of time was this like guinea pig swarm where you had like hundreds of thousands of guinea pigs forming into like one gigantic like shape, like a hand or something that would like come down and grab the characters. So it was, you know, researching how to do that, how to even start that process was just a whole like year-long process for a sequence that maybe lasts like 70 seconds in the movie, in the final movie. So it's like maybe 30 shots. But it was something that we had researched like the entire year leading up to it, of just how to do this effect at all. And, again, it's only on screen for maybe a minute or two, but, just even those quick shots that are like 25 frames, I'm just like, I remember when we were discussing that, and, it's just a lot of fun.
Wow. After hearing all of this, I'm going to appreciate every single frame that I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
The hours and hours of revision, of work that has been put through to get this frame to look absolutely beautiful.
I think one of the best examples is your own TikTok video where you're analyzing Puss in Boots.
Oh, that
we
was
were watching
amazing.
that. Not only is that fight scene one of the best, your analysis of the whole scene makes it even more engaging to watch, because you get to understand all the little details they went into to make it as perfect as it was. I do want to talk about one thing. We'll get into the Puss in Boots the direction of it, because I think that's interesting. You talked earlier about the difference between production and the animation department.
Yeah.
I have no idea what you want to talk about, but I'm very interested to know exactly what you meant by it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that I describe it is that you can think of the entire animation team as a tree. So I call this the tree metaphor. So the leadership is the trunk of the tree, where every decision that comes through has to be filtered through them. So that would be the directors, the executive producers, the producers, your core leadership team. The artists are the leaves on the tree. That's the thing that you see immediately when you first watch the movie, is you can see all the hard work of the artists, and that would be the leaves of the tree. So then the branches is what production represents, and that's the part that connects the leaves to the trunk. So production is the part of the department that is responsible for making sure that the artists have exactly what they need, taking notes, making sure they, stay organized and on top of everything, but also, getting creative with like trying to provide artists with a different direction sometimes from the leadership team. And so a lot of the production work that is done is, by people that aren't actually in shots themselves and animating things, but are still directly influencing the entire pipeline by making sure that, notes get passed seamlessly back and forth. And, if you have to get super creative about, when the note goes into whom and where and why, there's kind of a lot of logistics with that. So it's really great for people who are very organized and, maybe want to work in animation, but are not artists themselves. I know that a few people that have worked into production that, cannot draw. I mean, I can't draw myself. I can 3D animate, but I really can't.
I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah. So it's, it's a department that is often overlooked, because when you think people who worked on an animated movie, the term you think is animators. So it's not necessarily something that you would think of going into. And, there's entire teams in feature animation that you wouldn't expect, like lawyers and accountants and, entire teams that are equally as important to the entire process. And, all the artists need to get paid. So we need an accounting department to take care of that. So there's, that's kind of the thing that I like to talk about with production, is just highlighting the coordinators and assistants and supervisors and production managers and all these different roles that, are not getting the high praise of like when I'm animating a scene and saying like, oh, these animators did this and this, I can't really say like, oh, well, the coordinator did a good job of taking this note. And, it's not really something that you can see visibly, but is equally as important to the entire animation pipeline.
Wow. When you say all of this has to go into the next part of our discussion, which is regarding one of your videos that has over 200,000 views on YouTube. And your title is basically "The Animation Industry is Facing a Crisis." And some of these factors that you're talking about include the impact of AI, generative AI to be more precise, massive layoffs, corporate strategies, and over this long period in that video, you're discussing all of these different factors and more of them in detail. And the way you open up that discussion is quite interesting, because a lot of the people in the industry are aware of it, but a lot of people watching from the outside are unaware of it, because once in a while we'll see these beautiful animations that are being released. So to the outsiders, this doesn't look like it's a problem. Everything's fine, but apparently it's not. And I want to ask you one question. Based on all of these factors that you discussed in that video, what do you think is the most significant cause that could be the downfall of the animation industry?
I think the obvious answer and the most uncomfortable one is probably just corporate greed at this point, is just, a few people at the top of these corporations that are making these decisions that happen to trickle down to the rest of the company that get affected. For example, the AI conversation. I think everyone has their own opinion about AI, but I think there are two discussions that are happening simultaneously that often get muddled together. And that's, number one is AI a tool? And the other one being, like, how will AI affect jobs? And, we can say that AI is a tool, like, a carpenter has a power tool. But, if you had a carpenter laying off skilled workers with experience to then hire, amateurs to build a house or something, you would be concerned about the quality of the house that's being created because it's being used, it's being built by people that are not skilled. They don't have the same sort of experience. And that's kind of what we're seeing in our industries is like, the tools themselves, to me personally, are not really the issue. It's really like how the tools are being put out there and by whom and for what reasons. So a lot of these studios are looking at generative AI and they're not thinking, oh, this is great. We can empower our current artists to create really amazing work more efficiently. What they're looking at is saying, oh, we can cut costs dramatically by laying off 90% of our department. And that's where you see like executives like Jeffrey Katzenberg saying that, 90% of all animation roles will be, made obsolete by AI. That's exactly what he's talking about is, his perspective is, oh, we can, these studios can save a lot of money if we aren't, if we're not hiring artists to be the ones to use these tools. And so I think at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is just the difference between what the workers at these studios want out of the studio and what the people at the top want out of, their company. And sometimes it's, the executives want a little bit more of a bonus, so they'll, lay off. Obviously, there's a vast oversimplification of both sides, but I think that's kind of where it stems, is just having that conversation about, what the workers in the studio wants versus what the executives want out of the same company.
I just want to ask Farhad the same question because I have something to say about Jeffrey Katzenberg. Farhad, what is your take on it? What do you think is the most significant cause of the downfall?
I would think of the corporate strategies. AI, I would say that would be something that we have to worry about it in a year or two for it to actually come in and cut jobs. But I think corporate strategies and looking at profit over quality, this is the biggest problem that we are facing now. We can see the movies are going out, prequels, sequels, remakes, one after another, but the level of quality doesn't resonate with the titles.
Right.
This is funny because Jeffrey Katzenberg, me and Farhad are reading Steve Jobs' book. Farhad's done. I'm halfway through. Jeffrey Katzenberg is the guy who was working at Disney at a time where Steve Jobs was building Pixar. And they made the deal to create Toy Story together. Now, Steve didn't really like Katzenberg. You can see it. Yeah, he fucking hated him. You can see it in the fucking book. You just have to read it yourself. I have to give it to Katzenberg. Without his existence, these movies, these amazing animated films would still not happen because he was part of the deal. But again, there's a reason why Steve didn't like him. And we have to talk about Steve Jobs, the role he played in bringing animated films to a whole new level. And this translated to his products at Apple as well. He cared about the product, not the money. He was a freaking millionaire. He made so much money, but he cared about the product first. And that's why we saw so many great animated films when he was working at Pixar. I'm just afraid we don't have that anymore. I'm just afraid we don't have people at the top who care enough about the product itself. They can be rich. They're still going to make a lot of money. They probably can't even spend all that fucking money. But I just don't think they care because it shows. I'm seeing so many TikToks, not just yours. Yours is actually one of the more famous ones. I'm seeing TikToks with just thousands of views, just random people talking about the same thing, saying, oh, this theater is just putting the 20th anniversary of this movie, the 15th anniversary of this movie. And people are going and watching that.
How many Fantastic Four do we need?
I don't know.
No, that's a good point. I think there's always the discrepancy between what the executives want out of, they want something that will make money. This is a business investment for them at the end of the day. So they want something that they're going to get their money back on. And then, the age-old discussion with, money versus creatives and, the creatives wanting to care about the product and make sure that it's the best thing that they can be versus the people that want to make sure that they're going to get a good return on these movies, on these things. And I think it's interesting that the Katzenberg and Steve Jobs comparison is really it's an interesting comparison because they are two executives at the top of their game, in very smart at what they do. Katzenberg was leading a lot of the Disney movies and even just on the 2D side for the longest time, and then he kind of got in a fight with I believe he got in a fight with Michael Eisner and then left to start DreamWorks Animation. So that's kind of where that came from. But Katzenberg always wanted to have a good story and everything too. He was just coming at it from the perspective of we need this to do well and we need this to make money. And I think, Steve Jobs can probably say something similar, but a lot of what Steve Jobs was coming at this with was, the consumer. He always had the consumer in mind, even just for Apple products and for Pixar movies too. So his big thing was, like, for example, Toy Story. When Toy Story came out, it was such a hit, and they knew that they had a really good hit on their hands because the reviews for Toy Story didn't really mention how it was the first computer animated feature film. It was saying how great the story was. And that was the thing that these reviews were focusing on, not the technical achievements, not the shiny things. It was story. And that's the thing that made Pixar realize, okay, we're onto something here. Like, we have something, we have this great story machine, and that's what we value Pixar for, is their wonderful stories. But Steve Jobs was definitely at the forefront of that, making sure that the quality was always there. And, I think there are, to say that there are no executives that care about the quality, I would maybe disagree with that, but I think like a large majority of, what their decisions are based on is shareholder value. And, if Disney's going to make a decision to make a, feature animated movie that takes a visual risk and is not in the same art style as their other movies, like the Disney's Wish that came out last year, didn't do so well at the box office and with critics. So the takeaway for them probably will be, well, the thing that, kept audiences away was probably because we took this risk. So we're going to play it more safe and do more sequels and reboots and everything. And, inherently, I don't really have an issue with sequels and reboots unless they're, just kind of just made for, the sake of just checking a box. Because, the audience will say, how many times have you heard people say, like, I'm so sick of remakes, I'm so sick of sequels and everything. And then you see something like the Lion King remake from 2019. It's the top grossing animated movie of all time. So clearly there is this desire for people to have this, this experience, to have these animated movies come out that are remakes, that are sequels. There's clearly a demand for it, but what the audience wants versus what their spending habits are two very different stories. And I think like people like Steve Jobs and Jeffrey Katzenberg know that. So, the way that they butt heads is more like caring about the quality versus if they're making something for just, making the shareholders happy. And that's kind of the age old discussion now of, the shareholders versus the creatives and, who are you making this movie for? Are you making it for, are you trying to get, best animated feature at the Oscars, or are you trying to, make sure that the stock value of your company goes up because your movie did well? So it's equally valid reasons, frankly, but it's just a different discussion. But yeah.
The interesting thing is, though, and I want to know if you guys agree with me on this, there is a way to do it. Steve Jobs was known for being very efficient with costs. He knew how to build a lean team and create amazing products. So you can actually make great returns, save money, and create amazing products. Yeah. But it's not going to be easy. So there is the bright side and the silver lining to all of this is that with the right leadership, it can be done.
The point here is the number of films made. When you are making too many movies in a year, you have to hire too many resources. Then you will lose the quality control. Steve Jobs had a very lean team focusing on one animation per year. Imagine if Disney wants to make now 10 animation, they have to outsource half of this work to somewhere, to maybe to other countries, and then the result wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that is the key element in this is that right now, with the infinite growth mindset that these companies are kind of operating on, they have to produce more and more and more every year. You can't just make a good film every year that checks the box, that makes $1 billion every time, which would be great. But the shareholders want to see $1.5 billion and then $2 billion. So they want to see growth out of these companies. And, that kind of conflicts with the model of quality over quantity. Is you really want to create something that that people connect with and people really resonate with. But also, if you're a company like Disney, you're trying to, pay for your parks and your employees' salaries and everything by this movie doing well. So you have to have a movie that does well because a lot of people's, careers and their salaries depend on these movies doing well. So, that's kind of where you can see maybe too many cooks in the kitchen, where you have a lot of executives coming in thinking that they know what's best for the movie, when in actuality, what they need is someone who can just tell an authentic story to them. Right now, I think what you see at Disney Animation and, maybe studios like Pixar as well, where the leaders of these companies, they're often pairing new directors with someone who's a little bit more experienced. And I think, their recent announcement is they kind of want to scale that back and not tell stories like Turning Red or Luca or Soul, which are, they're really great. I love all three of those movies, but they're all really personal stories. And I think, the direction of saying we don't want to tell personal stories anymore. We're going to move forward with sequels and reboots in order to play it safe. That is an option. That's something you can do. I don't think that will, create the right conditions to create beautiful, meaningful, lasting art. But, I'll still see Toy Story 5. What the heck? Why not? So, it's people thinking they know what is right for the company. But yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation to be having of, who are these movies being made for at all? And I think, these Pixar movies, these Disney movies are coming out and they're really just checking a box at this point. And so that the shareholders are, they can be secure knowing that, okay, Disney is doing well enough that I will continue supporting it and make the stock go up. But yeah, it's the age of the conversation.
So we are talking about the impact that these decisions have on the quality of the output. But there has to be an impact to the artists that are also working on the film. You had a TikTok video that had more than 8 million views. And this number shows that a lot of people resonated with what you were saying. So the video titled as The Flash's bad VFX is just the tip of the iceberg. And you were talking about the unrealistic expectation, the overtime, and the workload that the artist was facing.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more about that project? And I believe you left it after 3 months, right?
Yeah. So I came in to a VFX company that was working on a small part of The Flash. And, the nature of these movies now is you have many VFX companies working on these movies. So, part of my work was working on The Flash in the same day as working on Black Adam or Aquaman. The nature of the job just required you to be handling, different files for each project on the same day. So I was a it's a coordinator role, but it was volume capture post-production coordinator or something like that. So I got to see a glimpse of what the VFX industry is like. And, the VFX industry versus the animation industry, two very different industries right now. And, very similar in that they kind of do a lot of the same work, but VFX right now is getting a lot of pressure on it to deliver faster and faster and faster results in a shorter amount of time. And I was saying the way that these studios will get work is they will bid on these projects. And, a bidding economy like that will almost always create a lower and lower quality because, companies want to outbid each other and say, we can do this for $1 million, and another company say, we can do this for 800,000. So that becomes the standard when you only have a few companies making superhero movies or large budget VFX films like a Disney, like a Warner Brothers. So that, it becomes that they're competing with each other in this environment. And it leads to a lot of overtime with these artists. A lot of them are burning out, creating unsafe working conditions where the artists have to work a lot of long hours, sometimes with no overtime pay. And it's just creating this economy of, depending on making things faster and faster and faster. And one of the things I said in the video is, if it looks like a shot was made in a week, it probably was. it's not a very uncommon thing in VFX is to turn out these shots really, really quickly. And you would think that, like let's say a movie like Pirates of the Caribbean 2, the gold standard of VFX, Davy Jones.
Yeah.
The way that VFX was in that movie is so timeless because, the economy of VFX wasn't really figured out by these studios of, we can overwork these artists and get 3 movies a year instead of just the one. So, you kind of have this discrepancy between the quality that is expected of a superhero movie from a large company like Disney or Warner Brothers and what is being put out. And, the audience can see through it. The sequence in The Flash that people were very critical about, rightly so, felt very much rushed. And it's probably because it was. And, it feels like this is just all too common. And, and I decided to leave just out of kind of realizing that, okay, this is not for me.
Not going to be part of this.
Yeah, I don't really agree with how they're operating this. And, I don't want to age 50 years in 1 week. And, it was just unsustainable. And I knew that I wanted to do my own, start my own company, make my own animations. So I kind of took that, opportunity to say, okay, I think this is the right time for me to step away. And, but also, looking back at it, I would hate for people to think to watch a movie like The Flash or Avengers or, Dead Man's Chest and think, I really want to go into VFX because I want to have my work valued by, people and by these companies. And then to get into VFX and be surprised by the industry and to be, to not expect how tumultuous it really truly is right now. So I kind of, just made it for myself. Really didn't think 8 million people would see it, but that's just the nature of TikTok, I guess. But yeah, I thought it was important to at least, make it known, and not to say that like The Flash specifically was the issue. Like it wasn't, the team I worked with was great. They were just really overworked and very stressed. So I had no issue with the people that worked on these movies. It was more just like, this is part of a larger problem in VFX is, the VFX should be getting better and better and better. With all this tech coming out, you would think that the VFX are going to be really great. They should look better than Dead Man's Chest did. What was it? 18 years ago now, I think. So it's a crazy difference in what we expect the quality to look like and then what we see in these final movies. And, sometimes the audience doesn't really care. And I think that's, that the point that I made in that video too was like, the big secret is that movie executives don't really care about quality. All they care about is making sure that people go see it. So as long as, your movie makes $1 billion at the box office, they could care less whether, the skin texture on The Flash looked like rubber, or something like that. So yeah, that was a doozy.
You're like the Edward Snowden of the Hollywood industry. I'm just joking. I want to ask. I have a really important question, but before I get to that, you mentioned the volumetric capture production coordinator. What is that?
Yeah. So the volume that we were working with, and I can talk about it because they made a whole behind the scenes video on it now. But essentially what they did to get these actors into these 3D environments and everything was they created a rig where the actors could stand in, like the classic like cage of cameras that, it can scan the actors. They did that in a way that they could basically create 3D models and sequences that they could drop in. So this animated performance could be dropped into like an Unreal Engine, and you can light the actor in a different way. So it's kind of acting like, polycam, but 24 frames a second, essentially.
So like a moving,
4D,
4D capture sort of thing, right?
Yeah, in a way. So, the details on it, I probably shouldn't talk about too much, but the idea was that, you have this volume capture process, and then you need a team to interpret that data and make it usable for the rest of the team, clean it up and everything like that. There's a whole team that was just really making sure that the data that was captured can be usable by production. So our team was responsible for cleaning up the data and making it usable for the layout artists, the animators, to be able to go in and tweak the performances as needed.
This This is really sick. So for architectural visualization, we were going on this website, I believe it's called Render People, and there's a 4D section now, and it's the exact same thing. It's a volumetric capture. And for anybody that doesn't know what this is, you have to understand how amazing this technology is, because there's cloth simulation baked in that video. So essentially, what we worked with, I don't know about you guys, was an Alembic file that comes in with everything. So you've got 3D video, if that's like a way to explain it. All the hair, the cloth is moving in the perfect way, no artifacts, and it's amazing. It just works instantly. And as you said, you can light it and all that sort of things. It's very cool, but it's very heavy at the same time. Yeah. Have they used that a lot in these movies? Are they going to be using a lot more of this, you think, based on your experience?
Yeah, from my understanding, the tech was being built so that it could be used moving forward in these different, by these different companies, by these different films. And, part of it is a tool. Like sometimes you're getting it, and maybe the animator will get this data and realize, actually, we have to reanimate this character because, the nature of the scene is just so crazy chaotic or something like that. So it's kind of used as a tool in that sense, and just a way for the team to quickly capture, accurate lighting data and everything like that. But also the way that they set this rig up was they had screens on the inside of this cage, essentially, that the actors could see a previs version of the scene. So, like for Aquaman, if he was swimming through the scene, he can see from his perspective on the screen, the camera moving through a tunnel or something like that. So, it's just a little bit more for the actor to work off of than just, okay, you're in front of a green screen and you're being chased by a giant squid. Go.
Yes.
Like it's a lot harder to do something like that than if you just give them something to work with. And I think that was the big revelation with that tech, was that it was useful for both production and the actor themselves. So I think the idea was to just try to push the volume capture process even further with this, and try to get a good result. A, get a good result, but B, get something that the actors can play with and have fun with and get better performances out of.
Okay, that's actually very interesting. I'm looking forward to see that. One of the things I want to talk about is AI. Of course, we have to talk about it. It's on everybody's minds, and we can go as detailed as we want. But talking about corporate strategies, that was one of the main causes of the animation crisis. And the reason for that is because, as we talked about, the shareholders' interest is to raise more money, raise as in more profits. And one of the best ways and the most appealing ways to do that is through AI, because guess what? It makes things quicker. It eventually is going to make a lot of things better in terms of quality. Not at the moment. It still sucks in a lot of areas, but eventually will. Yeah, eventually will. As every company is in an arms race, like OpenAI and Google Gemini, to make better models. And they use more data from the internet to make better models. So it is without a doubt that AIs will become more and more intelligent at what they do. And this is a problem as well, because at the same time, when there is more profits through AI, that means we are going to be taking away some of the jobs that artists are doing, because they take longer and they cost more. And the third reason, which is quite devilish, is we don't have to deal with people. It's just like a code, and you press enter and it does the work. What are your thoughts on that? I want to hear both of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the way that it's currently situated is it's a lot of potential, and it's a lot of promises being made by a company like OpenAI to say, like, yes, in 3 years, this tech is going to be so good that it will replace character animators. Reminds me a lot of the self-driving functionality that we are supposed to get anytime from Tesla, where it's full at any point. We're going to get this self-driving, and it's going to be great. And I think 2017 was the year that we're going to get it. So
perhaps perhaps earlier.
Yeah. So a lot of this tech is just based on the promise of and the potential of creating these these amazing images and these amazing videos. And there are people actively working on AI models like this to make them better and better. And I don't think the people that are creating these AI tools have in mind like, oh, this is going to be great, I'm going to take jobs away from millions of people. Like, I don't think it's that nefarious. I think it's just a difference between like what the tool is being created for and who is using the tool for what reason. So, you know, to get back to kind of what we were saying earlier of just like the studios that are looking at this to say, oh, I can replace artists with this tool, essentially. They probably have not, you know, created a character themselves, you know, like, or they don't have the mindset of like a character designer. So they can get an output and think, oh yeah, this looks good enough. This looks good for what I need. Meanwhile, if you had a character designer looking at this, you can say like, oh, well, you know, there's a lot of primary shapes, but there's not a lot of secondary shapes and tertiary details here. So we need to make sure that the balance of the character works so that it's not coming across as asymmetrical and, you know, things like that a character designer would have this, you know, this knowledge set of. And I think, you know, in the hands of like let's say a character designer uses this tool, they can probably steer it in a direction that will get a really solid output. But, you know, if you're replacing artists with inexperienced people that, you know, like for these like AI prompt engineers that, you know, some companies are hiring, or AI artists that, you know, these companies are bringing in, you know, if they don't have the experience of creating, you know, character animation is a great example, because the amount of notes, kind of like what we were saying earlier, the amount of notes that go into a close-up of a character where all they have to do is like look up, think, look down, scrunch their face, and then look back. You know, the amount of notes and details that go into a shot like that is insane. And in a production pipeline might be unmanageable because, you know, the way these AI models currently work is you get a brand new output every time. Even if they're saying like, oh, it only tweaks a little bit, you're still like losing some of the detail, and maybe it's a different shirt or it's a different like, you know, facial hair on the actor. So I think, yes, it probably will continue to get better, and it will continue to, you know, push towards something that is usable by these companies. The thing that I, you know, kind of try to make sense of it with is, you know, how artists are adapting to it. And, you know, if the artists have the same exact tools as what these studios have, in my opinion, I think artists should be learning AI and what it does, and more importantly, what it does not. Because a lot of what these companies are promising is you're going to get a Hollywood grade shot right away. But the reality is it takes a lot of iterations to get anything close to what they show in those demo videos. Yeah. So, you know, it's probably maybe days and weeks worth of iterations to get it perfect. And that I don't think will go away. I think, you know, the curation of the images is something that artists are still going to have to be good at. And so, you know, my advice to people listening, artists listening, is just learn what these tools do and what they don't do, because you might be surprised what they don't do and how you as an artist can fill in the blanks in that sense. And, you know, like something like Photoshop generative fill. It does a decent job for like very specific portions. But, you know, it won't replace your entire image and get it completely photorealistic every time. It's just a tool. And I think to frame it that way of still using it as a tool is equally as important, and making sure that artists know that going forward, like, yeah, we have the same tool sets as these Hollywood studios do. But, you know, you still need the experience, and you still need to like put in the hard work of making it look as good as possible. But,
I agree with you. I think the analogy of Adobe Firefly is the best example of how it speeds up the process and how it can take care of some of the elements. I still believe a film or an animation is a curated story. And in order to get that curated story, you need to go through a lot of iterations. With the current models, with the current devices, with current language models that we have, this is not possible. In the future, it can help to speed up the process, and it can help the artist. But it would be really, really amazing if we have the artist learn these tools at the same time. Because if an artist can use them effectively, there would be the person who can generate the best image, generate the best video, animating the character, because now we can see AI tools that helps us with character animation or character creation. But the best person who can use them is the person who actually knows how to create those characters in the first place.
Right.
I think for me, what AI will do is definitely going to eliminate some of the traditional jobs at traditional companies, because the companies are going to want to make more profit by getting rid of people, just like they are in the massive layoffs. That's something you've discussed as well. But at the same time, I think the upside here is the silver lining lies in the resistance. I saw this video just a couple of days ago. It might have been an X post, actually, just a thread of how people love the resistance. We love being part of the resistance, even in movies. That's why we like The Matrix, right?
Yeah.
And every single time you watch a movie, you take side with the resistance. And here, what AI can do, because there's going to be so many different types of AI and so many AI agents, AI assistants for each artist, you're going to essentially democratize different skill sets to an artist and allow them to use that. So you'll see, and I think this is something you discussed as well, you'll see a lot of a smaller, leaner teams, indie studios coming out with 3-man teams making a gigantic feature film on their own and feature animation, because they can fill in all the blanks, all the weaknesses that they have using AI. They have a great story. They just use AI to fill in the bits. So instead of taking 2 years to create something, they'll take 6 months and they create an amazing story on their own, and they beat Disney productions or Pixar productions, for instance, because they cared a lot about their product and their story. Again, I'm generalizing here. I'm not saying all of Disney and Pixar productions are bad. I'm just saying there are some, and that's what we're talking about. But one more thing that I think is really interesting is that we really have to understand people like Ian Hubert. I don't know if you know him. He's an amazing YouTuber. With Blender, which is a software that has been democratized, right? A free 3D software. He is able to create his own film on his own. He has some help, but he does majority of the things himself. This is not something that was possible 20 years ago, because all these 3D softwares were just too expensive. You needed hardware that was not accessible to individuals. And that is what I think can happen with AI as well, just like what happened with Blender and Ian Hubert, where you see him creating all these amazing films on his own. So I'm excited. As pessimistic as I can be, I'm also optimistic about where AI can go.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair assessment that, like, yeah, at the end of the day, like, I'm a tech guy. I love looking all this new tech coming out and getting really excited about it. And, you know, understanding what its place is going to be going forward in the future. I think the Ian Hubert example is great. I mean, he's like the king of DIY with Blender. It's like, you know, he's able to, you know, like balance a lot of the parts of production and animation all himself. And there's that classic graph. I don't know if you've seen it, where it's, I believe it's like quality, or like good, fast, and cheap. And you can only pick 2.
Yeah.
And that's like the way that every production gets made, is like, you can focus on the quality and doing it quickly, but that means that it's going to be a lot of money. Or, you know, so I think AI tools like this can kind of help balance that out a little bit, of making something that, you know, is good looking and you can do it fast. And it, you know, you can do it for a reasonable cost at this point, because these tools are so accessible. You know, I think the Ian Hubert example is interesting because he's taking, you know, for his own schedule, he's taking, you know, quite a long time to get it just right and to do it on his own terms. And, you know, the stuff that he puts out is amazing. It takes months and months and months to get it to that point. But, you know, he's able to do this on his own because he's indie. And I think, you know, if you talk about the future of, you know, where this industry is going, I think, you know, indie studios is kind of the future of this. And, you know, you have a lot of people like look at the amount of pilots on YouTube that have done amazing, like The Amazing Digital Circus is a great example from Glitch Productions, where, you know, I think they're something like their first episode has like 300 million views or something like that. 22-minute pilot. And it's this crazy viral thing. Completely independently funded through like Patreon and merch and everything. And I think like, yeah, that's, I think the future of the industry is these indie teams working on this. And you don't need, you know, the infrastructure of something like Disney and Pixar. And I think they might know that too. These larger studios know that, you know, there is this impending revolution happening. I think it started with YouTube, and I think it's being continued by people on TikTok and people on Instagram and everything like that. Like, you know, when you start democratizing these tools and making it easier for artists to access the same tool sets, you're going to see a lot of really cool art come, and also, make stuff that's really, really revolutionary in terms of how it gets made. I mean, my own studio, we're working on a VR animation that is, I'm completely self-producing it, and it's completely independently created. Like right now, I'm just, funding it off of my own income. And that's something that I can do because the tools are out there, and I can use the tools and create something unique, and I don't have to rely on pitching it to a studio in order to get the funding to create this thing. I can just, put the hard work in and model the characters and animate them and use Unreal and follow the bad decisions Unreal tutorials.
Oh, yes. That's something you couldn't say, not the Unreal bad decision part, but when you say self-funding it and working on it on your own, you couldn't say that 20, 30 years ago.
You couldn't say the bad decision part 20 years ago.
You couldn't say that 20 years ago. Yeah.
No.
It's a little baby. But the point is, now you can because of the tools available. So if we're being optimistic, maybe, just maybe, if everything goes the right direction, in 20 years' time, you'll have artists just like yourself creating all these amazing...
Years?
20 years? Okay, you're right.
Like
5
2.
years. 5 years. Yeah. You're right.
20 years.
It's exponentially growing. You're right. You're right. I got it.
But before it becomes the dominant part of our industry, maybe 20 years. But I think these studios and these tech companies are not going to go down without a fight, and I think they're going to want to maintain that foothold. Yeah, so it happens to be that Google is the one creating these tools to create generative AI and things like that. So they kind of have ownership of that, and I think OpenAI's Sora model, I don't think is going to get released publicly. I think they were kind of keeping that one close to the chest.
It's okay,
but
Dream Machine by Luma's out there.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So
the Chinese version is pretty good too.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't used.
They're
going to
open source a lot of this for sure, and but I think that's to me, I think that's the coolest part of all of this new tech coming out and making it democratized. Is I think the Blender model is perfect, where you have the studios creating. I think the way that Blender gets worked on is genius, where they're working on short films and animations, and then as they create these tools, like they get a really good hair simulation tool, they push that out immediately. And if they get good animation tools, they'll push that out the next week. You don't have to wait years and years for these tools to come out. It's just part of their pipeline, but they're doing so by creating these pieces of art, these short films and everything. And I think that's a really interesting model for me, is the open source mindset.
Isn't that ingenious?
It's crazy. And
it's
the fact that, if you pay a little bit of money to them, you can download their project files that they are working on. It's such a revolutionary concept that I think more artists should explore in the future too.
And
but
Blender's free.
And Blender's
Can you
free.
believe it? Can you believe it?
Community driven.
Yeah. It's insane. I mean, that's hats off to the entire Blender development team, because they are just kicking ass and making it so artists like myself can create animations that, can be seen by, hundreds of thousands of people, because I have the ability to do that for free. And it's just, I think that's the future of the industry.
I think I was at SIGGRAPH or somewhere where I was looking at the production pipeline of different animation production houses, and Blender was already a part of a lot of these teams, but it was mostly in the 3D modeling phase. So everything after that was done in other 3D software. Do you have any knowledge of if that's changing, where you'll see Blender in more and more parts of the production pipeline, which could be promising to the future Blender artists?
Yeah, I think from my understanding, the UV unwrapping in Blender is kind of unmatched, and they kind of nailed it with their algorithms and their ability to just do it so quickly that it's not this arduous task that I haven't used Maya extensively to that to be do a lot of UV unwrapping, but I know the way that Blender operates with that specifically is just radical and just very intuitive. As far as how Blender is being used in the professional pipelines, I think a lot of the studios at let's say DreamWorks, they do have their own proprietary tools that they developed their own animation studio or animation software in-house that was built by artists for artists. And, so I think maybe with the larger studios, Blender is not really something that, will be used directly. But, whenever I learn a new software, I kind of come in with the mindset of like, okay, I know Blender. I know how Blender operates. And I know like, when you use the right mouse button tool, it brings up this menu. Okay, so I just need to figure out in Maya how that same tool operates in their ecosystem.
Yeah.
And, okay, the WER keys being like rotate, scale, translate. Yeah. Blender does it with the G, R, and S keys. Okay, it's just a different way of using this tool. So I think like if you can learn Blender and get really good at using that software, if you go to switch to something like Maya or 3ds Max, you will find that it is an easier transition than if you were to just start from scratch.
Yes,
and I think
absolutely.
Like knowing those tool sets, and even with Unreal Engine, like I think going into this software that is more of a game engine, and they do their materials just a little bit differently than how Blender or Maya would do it. It's a little bit of an adjustment, but I can equate it to something in my head already that I'm familiar with. Instead of opening up the node tree here in Blender, it's just a double click on the material asset in Unreal, and it pops up with this. You can kind of wrap your head around that, but you have something to base it off of. So, I still encourage a lot of people to learn Blender and to try it out. And, if you're completely new, there are so many tutorials out there. It's insane. So there's always easy to get started in something like that. And it's always better to have that in your toolkit so that if you get to, let's say you get a job at DreamWorks as a character animator, their proprietary software is something that they would have to teach you anyway. So you wouldn't know how to use this. So if you have an understanding of, 3D software, and any 3D software is like, if you have that understanding of, an x-axis, y-axis, z-axis, like you have that understanding already to be able to just translate it in your head into something that, is workable in their ecosystem. But, I think the value of having an open source, powerful 3D software cannot be understated. And I think, even if it's not being used by these large studios, who cares? Because it can be used by your studio. Yeah. And like, that's how you can make movies, is through this open source software. And you don't have to pay the Maya licensing fee. So, I still encourage people to learn Blender, even if it's not used in these studio systems, because I found, the transition can be doable and, it can work.
Speaking of 3D softwares, in 2024, what is the best way to learn animation?
So I think right now, the obvious answer is YouTube, frankly. I think if you have no animation skills whatsoever, going on YouTube and just searching animation tutorial, it will get you so many free videos that you won't even know where to start. But I think there are some specific people that I can highlight. The Sir Wade Neistat is a great animator and a great mentor and instructor on some animation basics. Obviously, Blender Guru being a big one for, I know he was on your podcast, which is awesome, by the way. Shout out to Andrew.
He's awesome.
But yeah, I think the best way to learn animation is just to try it, really, is to just get into the software. Even, forget the software. Just take out a pencil and a paper and just start going frame by frame. Get a sticky notes, and just make a little flip book and learn when I make this drawing here and this drawing up here, and I flip between the two of them, it looks like it's jumping this far. But if I add a frame in between, now it's going a little slower, but a little smoother. Understanding the fundamentals with that is I think a great way to just experiment with it. As far as books, the one that I always recommend to people is The Illusion of Life, which is written by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, who are two of the original Disney 9 Old Men, if you've ever heard of them. They were some of the animators that invented squash and stretch and
the
anticipation.
Right?
Yeah. So these guys were just these crazy kooky animators that just came up with all these principles that became the founding principles of animation anywhere, worldwide.
Wow.
But the two of these guys wrote a book that equally inspires you to become an animator and teaches you each principle in detail of what happens in an anticipation. Why do we have anticipations? Why is squash and stretch important to maintain volume? So things like that. So, the best ways to get started is YouTube, number one. If you could YouTube search for someone explaining The Illusion of Life, even better. But I would also recommend that book because it's like the definitive way to get A, inspired, but B, to get started. And then just try it for yourself. Start on pencil and paper, move into Blender, figure out like, how that operates differently, 3D animation versus 2D animation. I mean, 2D, Blender can do 2D animation now, which is insane. So, I mean, I've been using Blender since 2009. So I remember when it was not good and it was very different and it was a lot harder. I mean, I have seen it come so far in the last, decade and a half that it's crazy that it can do 2D drawings at all. So that's would be my recommendation to get started, and check out my YouTube channel for other animation breakdowns.
100%. Yeah. Speaking of your YouTube channel, you also talked about the VR experience that you're creating for spatial computing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the first animations that I made in college was this animation about two robots, two characters that are very easy to model. And it's this love story between two robots, and they're in this abandoned kind of city. And I always liked the story and I liked the characters, and I always wanted to adapt it into something else, whether it's a new short film or for something like VR. And then once I got, interested in VR, I realized, this is the perfect medium to tell the story. So the way that I'm approaching it is more like theater than film. And I think that's kind of a better metaphor for VR at all, is that when you put on a headset, you are entering a new space and you are in captivating yourself around a new environment. It's not real. Like, the experience is not trying to trick you into thinking, oh my gosh, this is real life. But you have the understanding that you're suspending your disbelief, and, being able to enter a new space means that, the rules of cinema and film don't really apply in that sense. So like a hard cut will be a lot more jarring than it would be in a film. So the way that I'm approaching this is more like theater in that sense, and, trying to come up with different ways of understanding space. And, like, for example, like the way that I'm blocking everything out is as if I'm sitting in front of a Broadway show, like right at the front of the stage, and then everything is staged around that sense, around that idea. So, we're updating the characters and the environment. I have a brand new art style with this. It's more Art Deco than like cyberpunk, because I think I'm a little bored of cyberpunk. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's just, it's more about like the shiny.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's more now about like the shiny tech and everything with it, but like the fundamentals of like what makes cyberpunk is like how dystopian it is. So anyway, the art style is more Art Deco because that harkens back to like the early days of cinema. And in my opinion, where VR is right now is where cinema was 100 years ago with the kinetoscope, where you would look in this gigantic machine and you would only see these little novelty experiences that maybe last like 20, 30 seconds. It wasn't, the language of film wasn't invented yet. So that's how I'm looking at this piece of tech, that like, the stories that we're making in this will last, decades into the future, because this new medium is still being figured out. And, as cool as I think like VR chat is, or Rec Room or things like that, I still want to approach this from like a storyteller's perspective, and like, what can you do in VR to tell a great story? And I think what we're developing is really cool. I'm very excited about it. It's in black and white. There's no dialogue. Ooh. It's like going back to basics of story, of like, it's two characters interacting with each other, pantomime, and it's this, this beautiful world that we're trying to create. And I'm trying to document it on my YouTube channel by going step by step of the writing process. The next episode I'm making is about the character designs and the characters themselves. And like, our character designer that we're working with is a friend of mine who worked on Rick and Morty. He worked on the Pickle Rick episode. Yes. So it's he took the designs that were in the script. I didn't even show him the original animation. I was like, I want a fresh perspective. And the character designs that he came up with were just amazing, and they're just so appealing and so of this world and of the story, and just so unique. So it's something I'm really excited about, and trying to document at the same time and slowly get the word out that we're going to be, crowdfunding this at some point, hopefully, and trying to get more eyeballs on it. I think the way that VR has kind of adapted in the last like 6 or 7 years, I'm frustrated by it because, you had these animations maybe 5 or 6 years ago that were like Oculus Story Studio was this animation studio that just made animated films for VR and like tried to explore this medium with storytelling. And then the thing that kind of became popular was the metaverse or, like VR chat, that kind of experience as social. It's like social interactions became more the norm. And, I still think that kind of falls in the novelty category where it does feel like it's good, it's fun, but it doesn't keep you coming back. And I think, there needs to be, and I think the way that like film adapted was it had artists, the tech got into, kind of going back to what we were saying, the tools were democratized and it got into the hands of artists and the artists were able to push that into the future of what became the film industry and cinema as a whole. So that's the approach we're taking with this. But that was a really long answer. But
it's very interesting that you're documenting the journey. I think that makes it super valuable and super important. Because when people see how you are creating, then the entire process would be much more pleasing for people to watch. So I think you should keep on creating the YouTube videos on. I remember you posted one about how did you do the writing, that the writing was so hard and difficult. So we are looking forward to see all the videos that you're going to create on YouTube, and we are looking forward to see the actual short film that you're going to create.
It's also the way you described it. The language of film was not invented at that time. And what you're saying is that the language of storytelling in VR has not been invented. And you're trying to pave that path. And it's so true because me and Farah have owned multiple VR devices, and there was no reason for us to go back to it. We never really felt like we want to go back and pick it up. We always got excited in the beginning, and eventually the excitement fell off. So with the way you're describing it and how you're connecting it to theater and the way you're going to tell your story using that, so there's no hard cuts, and you try to take away everything and just focus on the story, going back to the old Toy Story days where the focus was not the fact that this was done with amazing systems like CAPS, which was used as the method to render these images that was revolutionary at the time. You don't care about the VR technology. You're trying to tell a great story, but at the same time, it's backed by great VR technology. The story is the focus, so that's the important point. So I love the way you're looking at this, and as Farad said, we're looking forward to it. Do you have any release date in mind, like an approximate one?
Before I'm dead.
It's a good one, man. That's a good one.
From a real artist. A real artist. Have no deadline. Whenever it's done.
We need to get some corporate strategies over your head right now.
No, I think what I'm trying to do is, raise awareness of it, try to get some funding maybe later this year or early into next year, and then go into production on it. Because I'm an animator myself too, I'm going to be, handling the character animation, a lot of that in addition to any animators that I try to bring on. So, my pie in the sky goal is to have it done in 2026, maybe 2027. The nature of animation just in general is the average animated film takes about 5 to 7 years to go from script to screen. So it is a long process. And, having worked in the animation industry, I'm aware of that now. When, in college, I did this in like a year. I made like an 8-minute short film in a year. And I don't recommend that because it was just a lot of long nights, a lot of stress, a lot of sleep. Yeah. So I'm trying to approach this more professionally, like bring on, character designers and artists, environment artists, and just really try to do it as professional as possible. And, my producer works at Pixar, and we're trying to get that level of quality with this. And we understand that is going to take time. I went to animation school for a semester to like sharpen my animation skills to bring it up to that level of polish that, we're going to expect out of this. So, we understand that good quality takes time. So we're not trying to rush this out for like next year. But, it is encouraging to see things like Apple saying that they are, they're starting to have immersive narrative series. I think they just announced in their last keynote that there's going to be like the first Apple TV immersive narrative series, which is encouraging for people like me to see that, like, okay, this medium is not dead yet. It's not going the way of metaverse and social, and it's never coming back to immersive story. I think there is still the desire for that, even if even if people don't know it yet. I think once they see
wouldn't even
any
say
animated film in
still
VR
a desire,
is so
because I haven't fully experienced that yet. It's a new thing in my opinion, because I haven't experienced a really good immersive storytelling. So I think it's you said, it's just the beginning of it.
It's just the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm definitely not claiming to like invent a lot of this stuff. I know there's a lot of people that have been creating VR animated, immersive films for many years. I'm just trying to help make it more known and make it more publicized and show that, there is a market of artists doing amazing work. And I think, by showing how to do this kind of step by step, it's not necessarily a tutorial. It's more of like a production diary that you can reference and go back to. And like, I'm not teaching you like, okay, here's how to animate a character and do all this. It's more just documenting like, here's what my journey looked like. And, to go from 0 to 100 with a final product is going to take a long time. And understanding that well ahead of time and, from episode 1 is very crucial. And, trying to use my platform to show that, there's more than just Horizon VR, as fun as that can be. But yeah.
No, absolutely. Well, Zach, we got to say, first of all, it was a pleasure having you on the pod. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for all the wonderful conversations, because we learned a lot, and I'm sure people have. And I would encourage people to go ahead and check out your YouTube channel, not just to follow your amazing documentation of the entire series you're creating, but
the breakdowns, the animation breakdowns.
The animation breakdowns, but
they're
also
fun. I got more coming.
Yes.
Please, dude, they're amazing. But more importantly, if you guys heard the discussion we had and a debate about the issues that the animation industry is facing, then you have some amazing discussions about that in full length on your channel. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be making more of them, because there's so many people asking you. So I would definitely recommend people go ahead and check out your channel. So thank you so much for your time once again.
Yeah, thank you guys. You guys are fantastic, and keep up the Unreal tutorials and everything, because those are so entertaining and fun, and it just makes learning something that's as difficult and as intimidating as Unreal just so much more fun and approachable and enjoyable. So you guys are killing it too, and I see you guys are closing in on 100,000 subs on YouTube, so I'm rooting for that. That's gonna happen soon. You guys are gonna get that. But no, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well,
Thank
Zach,
you so much, Zach.
Appreciate it, man. For everybody watching and listening as well, you guys are awesome. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Until then, ciao.